Chapter 1. The Bonds of Brotherhood. The story begins in the bustling city of Lysoria, the capital of Eldoria, where two young men, Alaric and Thorne, grew up as brothers in all but blood. They were inseparable, bound by a shared love for adventure, a thirst for knowledge, and a fierce loyalty to each other. Alaric was the son of a noble family, destined to inherit his father's lands and titles. He was charismatic, with a sharp mind and a natural talent for leadership. His charm and wit made him the darling of Lysoria's court, and many believed he was destined for greatness. Thorne, on the other hand, was the son of a blacksmith, born into a life of hard labor and little privilege. But what Thorne lacked in wealth, he more than made up for in determination and raw talent. He was a gifted swordsman, his skills honed through years of practice in the forge and on the training grounds. Despite his humble origins, Thorne's prowess with a blade earned him the respect of nobles and commoners alike. The two young men were like brothers, their bond forged in the fires of shared struggles and triumphs. They trained together, fought side by side in tournaments, and dreamed of a future where they would serve the kingdom as equals, standing shoulder to shoulder against any foe. But fate had other plans for them. As they grew older, the differences in their backgrounds began to pull them in opposite directions. Alaric's rise through the ranks of the nobility brought him closer to the corridors of power, while Thorne's reputation as a swordsman led him down a darker path, one filled with jealousy, ambition, and the lure of forbidden magic. The seeds of their eventual confrontation were planted during a fateful mission on the borders of Eldoria, where the kingdom's enemies plotted in the shadows. Chapter 2. The First Betrayal. It was during a routine patrol on the kingdom's western border that Alaric and Thorne first encountered the shadowy forces that would change their lives forever. They were ambushed by a group of mercenaries, hired by a rival kingdom to sow chaos in Eldoria. The battle was fierce, and though Alaric and Thorne fought valiantly, they were outnumbered and overwhelmed. In the heat of battle, Alaric was gravely wounded, a sword slash cutting deep into his side. As he lay bleeding on the ground, he looked to Thorne for help, but his friend was nowhere to be seen. Thorne had disappeared into the forest, leaving Alaric to fend for himself. Alaric managed to survive, rescued by a group of Eldorian knights who arrived just in time to drive off the mercenaries. But the wound he suffered that day was more than just physical. He felt the sting of betrayal, the deep pain of being abandoned by the one person he trusted most. When he returned to Lysoria, Alaric confronted Thorne, demanding an explanation. Thorne, however, had none to give. He had indeed fled the battlefield, but not out of fear or cowardice. He had pursued the leader of the mercenaries, a mysterious figure who had been manipulating events from the shadows. But Alaric did not believe him. To Alaric, Thorne's actions were unforgivable. In his eyes, Thorne had broken the code of honor they both swore to uphold. Thorne had left him to die. The bond between them was shattered, replaced by a growing animosity that neither could fully articulate. Thorne, feeling betrayed by Alaric's lack of trust, left Lysoria, vowing to prove his innocence and reclaim his honor. Alaric, meanwhile, became consumed by a desire for vengeance, his heart hardened by what he perceived as Thorne's treachery. Chapter 3. The Path of Shadows. Years passed, and the once brothers followed separate paths, each driven by their own demons. Alaric rose to prominence within the kingdom, earning a reputation as a fearless warrior and a just leader. His name became synonymous with honor and valor, and he was eventually appointed as the captain of the king's elite guard. But beneath his stoic exterior, Alaric was haunted by the memory of that fateful day on the border. He could not shake the feeling that he had been wronged, that Thorne's betrayal was the source of all his pain. The wound in his side had healed, but the wound in his heart had only festered, poisoning his thoughts and clouding his judgment. Thorne, on the other hand, had vanished into the wilderness, becoming a wanderer, a ghost in the shadows of Eldoria. He honed his skills as a swordsman, pushing himself to the limits of human endurance. But his true focus was on something darker, something forbidden. He sought out ancient texts and relics, delving into the arcane arts in search of the power he believed would help him reclaim his honor. His quest eventually led him to the forbidden city of Morvain, a place long abandoned by the living and rumored to be the domain of dark magic. It was there, in the depths of the city's ruined cathedral, that Thorne found what he was looking for, a cursed blade, forged in the fires of the underworld and imbued with the power of the Shadow Realm. The blade, known as Umbra, was a weapon of immense power, but it came with a terrible price. Those who wielded it were bound to the Shadow Realm, their souls tainted by its dark energy. But Thorne, blinded by his desire for redemption, took up the blade without hesitation. He believed that with Umbra in his hand, he could finally confront Alaric and prove his worth. But the blade did more than grant Thorne power. It began to consume him, twisting his thoughts and feeding his growing resentment. The man who had once been Alaric's brother was slowly transformed into something else, something darker, more dangerous. Chapter 4: The Challenge. As Thorne embraced his new power, rumors began to spread throughout Eldoria of a shadowy figure who wielded a cursed blade and left destruction in his wake. Villages were razed, knights were slaughtered, and fear spread across the kingdom like a plague. The king, alarmed by the reports, summoned Alaric and ordered him to hunt down this rogue warrior and bring him to justice. Alaric accepted the task without hesitation. He had heard the rumors as well, and though he did not want to believe it, he could not shake the feeling that Thorne was somehow involved. The thought of facing his former brother in combat filled him with dread, but he knew that if Thorne had truly fallen to darkness, there was no other choice. The two men were destined to meet again, not as brothers, but as enemies. The code of honor demanded it. Alaric tracked Thorne across Eldoria, following the trail of destruction and death that marked his path. It was a journey that took him through dark forests, across desolate plains, and into the heart of the Shadow Realm itself. Along the way, Alaric was forced to confront his own doubts and fears, questioning whether he had the strength to do what needed to be done. Finally, after months of pursuit, Alaric found Thorne waiting for him on the edge of the Shadowed Moor, a place where the boundary between the mortal world and the Shadow Realm was thin. The air was thick with mist, and the ground was treacherous, but Alaric strode forward with determination, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. Thorne stood in the center of the moor, his back to Alaric, the cursed blade Umbra gleaming in his hand. He was clad in dark armor, his once bright eyes now cold and distant. The man Alaric had known was gone, replaced by a shadow of his former self. "Thorne," Alaric called out, his voice carrying across the moor. "It doesn't have to end this way. We can still find a way to make things right." Thorne turned slowly to face Alaric, his expression unreadable. "You still don't understand, do you? There is no going back for me, Alaric. The moment you turned your back on me, my fate was sealed. But now, with this blade, I can finally reclaim my honor. I can finally prove that I was right. By killing me?" Alaric asked, his voice tinged with sorrow. "Is that how you think you'll find redemption?" Thorne's grip tightened on Umbra. "This is not about redemption. This is about justice. You accused me of betrayal, but it was you who betrayed me first. You never trusted me. You never believed in me. And now, I will show you the consequences of your actions." Alaric sighed, drawing his own sword, a blade passed down through generations of his family, a symbol of honor and duty. "If this is what you want, then so be it. But know that whatever happens here today, I will always remember the man you once were." Thorne's eyes narrowed. "That man is dead." And with that, the duel began. Chapter 5: The Duel. The air crackled with tension as Alaric and Thorne circled each other, their swords gleaming in the dim light. The shadowed moor was silent, save for the soft rustle of the wind and the occasional croak of a raven. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash. Thorne struck first, his movements a blur as he lunged at Alaric with the speed and precision of a seasoned warrior. Umbra cut through the air with a deadly grace, its dark energy leaving a trail of shadows in its wake. But Alaric was ready. He parried Thorne's attack with a deft flick of his wrist, their blades ringing out as they met in a shower of sparks. The two men exchanged blows with lightning speed, their swords flashing as they danced across the moor. Thorne fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness, his strikes fueled by years of pent-up anger and resentment. But Alaric remained calm, his movements measured and controlled, a reflection of his inner resolve. As the duel raged on, it became clear that Thorne's newfound power was more than just physical. The cursed blade Umbra seemed to sap the very life from the moor, draining the light and warmth from the air. Alaric could feel its dark energy pressing in on him, weakening his resolve and sapping his strength. But Alaric refused to give in. He fought with everything he had, drawing on the lessons he had learned from years of training and experience. He knew Thorne's every move, every weakness, and he used that knowledge to his advantage, deflecting Thorne's attacks and countering with strikes of his own. But as the duel wore on, it became clear that Thorne was not fighting to win. He was fighting to destroy. His attacks grew more frenzied, more reckless, as if he was trying to break Alaric's spirit rather than his body. And with each passing moment, Alaric could feel his own resolve beginning to falter. Finally, with a roar of fury, Thorne unleashed a powerful strike, bringing Umbra crashing down on Alaric's blade with all his strength. The force of the blow sent a shockwave through the moor, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then, with a sickening crack, Alaric's sword shattered. Alaric stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock as he stared at the broken hilt in his hand. Thorne's lips curled into a triumphant smile as he advanced, the dark energy of Umbra swirling around him like a storm. "Your time is over, Alaric," Thorne sneered. "You never stood a chance." But as Thorne raised Umbra for the final blow, something inside Alaric snapped. He had fought with honor, with duty, with everything he had, and yet it had not been enough. But even as the darkness closed in around him, he refused to give up. With a final burst of strength, Alaric lunged forward, grabbing hold of Thorne's arm as the cursed blade came down. He twisted, using Thorne's own momentum against him, and drove the broken hilt of his sword into Thorne's side. Thorne's eyes widened in shock as he felt the cold steel pierce his flesh. For a moment, the two men stood frozen, locked in a deadly embrace. Then, with a cry of pain, Thorne staggered back, dropping Umbra as he clutched at his side. The cursed blade fell to the ground with a dull thud, its dark energy dissipating into the air. Alaric, breathing heavily, watched as Thorne collapsed to his knees, blood seeping through his fingers. He felt a wave of sorrow wash over him as he knelt beside his fallen brother, the weight of their shared past heavy on his shoulders. "I'm sorry, Thorne," Alaric whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I never wanted it to end this way." Thorne looked up at Alaric, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and regret. "I know," he rasped, his voice barely audible, "but it had to end, one way or another." And with that, Thorne slumped forward, his body going limp as the life drained from him. Alaric caught him as he fell, cradling his brother's lifeless body in his arms. The moor was silent once more, the echoes of their duel fading into the distance. Chapter 6. The Price of Vengeance. The duel was over, but the consequences of that fateful battle would echo through Eldoria for years to come. Alaric returned to Lysoria with a heavy heart, carrying the burden of his victory like a weight around his neck. He had fulfilled his duty, but at what cost? The kingdom was safe, but the price of that safety had been the life of his closest friend, the man he had once called brother. The people of Lysoria hailed him as a hero, celebrating his triumph over the shadowy threat that had plagued their land. But Alaric could find no joy in their praise. The memory of Thorne's final moments haunted him, a constant reminder of the cost of vengeance. In the days that followed, Alaric found himself consumed by guilt and doubt. He questioned whether he had truly done the right thing, whether there had been another way to save Thorne. But no matter how many times he replayed the events in his mind, he could not change the outcome. Thorne was gone, and Alaric was left to pick up the pieces of a life shattered by betrayal and bloodshed. The cursed blade Umbra, the weapon that had driven Thorne to madness, was sealed away in the depths of the royal vault, where it would remain hidden from the world. But its dark influence lingered, a reminder of the dangers of power and the corrupting force of revenge. Alaric withdrew from public life, retreating to the countryside where he could find some semblance of peace. He spent his days in quiet solitude, reflecting on the choices he had made and the path that had led him to this point. But even in his isolation, Alaric could not escape the shadow of his past. He dreamed of Thorne, of the days when they had fought side by side, of the brotherhood they had shared. And in those dreams, he was haunted by the knowledge that he had lost something irreplaceable. The years passed, and Alaric grew older, his hair turning gray and his once vibrant spirit dimming. He had lived a life of honor and duty, but it was a life tinged with regret, a life marked by the scars of a battle that had claimed more than just one life. And so, as the sun set on the kingdom of Eldoria, Alaric found himself standing once more on the edge of the shadowed moor, the place where it had all begun and where it had all ended. He knelt on the ground, the weight of his memories pressing down on him, and whispered a prayer for the soul of the man he had called brother. "I'm sorry, Thorne," he said, his voice barely audible in the stillness of the moor. "I hope that wherever you are, you have found the peace that eluded you in life." With that, Alaric stood, his heart heavy, but his spirit at peace. He had made his peace with the past, and though the wounds of that fateful duel would never fully heal, he knew that he had done all he could. As he turned to leave, the wind whispered through the moor, carrying with it the echoes of a time long past. And for a brief moment, Alaric thought he heard the voice of his brother, not in anger or pain, but in forgiveness. The price of vengeance had been steep, but in the end, it had also brought with it a measure of redemption. And so, Alaric left the shadowed moor behind, carrying with him the lessons of a life lived in the shadow of honor, duty, and the unbreakable bond of brotherhood. Epilogue: The legacy of the duel. The story of the duel between Alaric and Thorne became legend in the kingdom of Eldoria, a tale passed down through generations as a cautionary reminder of the dangers of pride, betrayal, and the pursuit of vengeance. In time, the people of Eldoria came to understand that the duel was not just a battle between two men, but a clash of ideals, a struggle between the forces of light and darkness, honor and dishonor, love and hate. And though Alaric's name was celebrated as that of a hero, the story also served as a reminder of the heavy burden that comes with such a title. For in the end, the true cost of that fateful duel was not measured in lives lost, but in the toll it took on the hearts and souls of those who fought it. The shadowed moor, where the duel had taken place, became a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to understand the true meaning of honor and sacrifice. The cursed blade Umbra remained hidden in the royal vault, its dark power contained but never forgotten. As for Alaric, he lived out the rest of his days in quiet reflection, far from the halls of power and the clamor of the city. He never returned to Lysoria, choosing instead to spend his remaining years in the countryside, where he could find some measure of peace. But even in his final moments, as he lay on his deathbed, Alaric could not escape the memory of the duel that had defined his life. He saw Thorne's face, heard his voice, and felt the weight of their shared past. And as he breathed his last, Alaric whispered a final prayer for forgiveness, for himself, for Thorne, and for the kingdom they had both loved and lost. The tale of the Duel of Shadows would live on, a story of honor, betrayal, and the high price of vengeance. And in the end, it would serve as a reminder to all who heard it that even in the darkest of times, there is always the hope of redemption and the possibility of finding peace in the shadow of the past.